for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening and welcome to Patrick Christys Tonight.
I don't know.
We don't know. So you have no idea where those 17,316 people are?
I don't think we know where all those people are, no.
You have no idea. Thank you very much, Chip.
Asylum seekers on the run. Is our civil service led by a load of clowns on the take from the taxpayer? Is it racist to say a majority white working environment damages your mental health? I speak shortly to an ex-BBC employee who hits back at claims that the Beeb is too white. And I speak to the king of the travellers, Paddy Doherty.
There's my Patrick. There's my son.
Do you want councils to get tough on travellers setting up camp on your land? Anne Widdecombe is on to discuss this shocking incident.
Down now, put them down now!
Yeah, I'll show you exactly what happened very, very shortly. But frankly, a police officer gets away with something that many people would find absolutely disgusting. But on my panel tonight, I've got the Telegraph's Madeleine Grant, I've got Lord Sean Bailey and the wonderful Amy Nicole Turner. This is Patrick Christys Tonight, and we're live. Email me. Should slack civil servants be sacked? GBviews at gbnews.com. We're all paying for them, and I'll tell you exactly how much we're paying for some of them as well. At GB News on Twitter. It's all go after the headlines.
A very good evening to you. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. 2 hostages have been released from Gaza following a last-minute deal between Israel and Hamas to extend their temporary ceasefire. 21-year-old Mia Skam, who appeared in the first hostage video released by Hamas, was reunited with her family earlier. And the 40-year-old Ahmed Susanna also arrived safely at hospital in Israel. Now, a further 8 Israeli hostages are expected to be released at some point tonight in exchange for 30 Palestinian prisoners. And we are watching and waiting for more on that. We'll bring it to you as soon as that happens here on GB News. Meanwhile, America's top diplomat says Israel must protect civilian lives in Gaza before it continues its military operations. Speaking in Tel Aviv, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the immediate priority is to extend the temporary ceasefire. And while he said the US supports Israel's aim to eliminate Hamas, the loss of life in northern Gaza cannot be repeated in the south.
Israel has the right to do everything it can to ensure that the slaughter Hamas carried out on October 7th can never be repeated. Hamas cannot remain in control of Gaza. It cannot retain the capacity to repeat that carnage. But as I've also said since I first came here after October 7th, the way Israel defends itself matters. Before Israel resumes major military operations, it must put in place humanitarian civilian protection plans that minimize further casualties of innocent Palestinians.
Here in the UK, Matt Hancock says a culture of fear inside Downing Street, created by Boris Johnson's chief advisor, undermined the government's pandemic response. The former Health Secretary described Dominic Cummings as a malign actor at the COVID inquiry and said the country should have gone into lockdown sooner.
If we'd had the doctrine that I propose, which is as soon as you know you've got a lockdown, you lock down as soon as possible, then we would have got the lockdown done over that weekend, in on the 2nd of March, 3 weeks earlier than before. There's a doubling rate at this point estimated every 3 to 4 days. We would have been 6 doublings ahead of where we were, which means that fewer than a tenth of the number of people would have died in the first wave.
Tributes have been paid from both sides of the political divide to the former Labour Chancellor Alistair Darling, who's died at the age of 70. Lord Darling served as a cabinet minister for 13 years under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, who praised his wisdom, calmness and his humour. The Prime Minister said he was a dedicated public servant who served the country through challenging times. And Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer described his loss to those who knew him as immeasurable.
Alistair's death has caused a shock and a profound sadness across not just the whole Labour movement, but across everybody who loved him and respected him. And that's basically everybody who knew him. He was the dedicated public servant. He was kind. I was privileged to know him as a friend and to have his advice. And our hearts go out to Maggie, his wife, and their children on this very, very sad day.
And the Prime Minister has switched on the lights of the Downing Street Christmas tree.
3, 2, 1.
And Rishi Sunak joked it was nice to click a button and make everything brighter. Christmas carols were played. Over 100 guests were in attendance at the festive market in Downing Street earlier. Well, that's it for the moment. We're on TV, online, DAB and TuneIn Radio too. But now it is over to Patrick.
The Home Office's answer to Laurel and Hardy need to pack their bags, which will be stuffed full of taxpayers' cash, and do one. I've been incredibly harsh on Rishi Sunak. I've been incredibly harsh on the government when it comes to immigration. But yesterday we saw the reality of the type of person tasked with implementing government policy and the will of the people. And they are a complete shambles. Sir Matthew Rycroft, Simon Ridley, they're called. And it's not just that they couldn't run a bath. It's that they clearly don't even care about running a bath, and actually they don't know where the bath is. Yesterday, they turned up to a Home Office scrutiny hearing and they gave worse answers than someone at a job centre who's desperately trying to remain on unemployment benefits. You know how people have been worried about asylum seekers and the fact that maybe they just leg it and disappear? Well,
we have no record of that 307% increase. The 17,316 claims withdrawn in the last year. You haven't a clue where those people now are.
These are people who have made a claim, who we have sought to invite to interviews, or we have sent out questionnaires, who have not responded, and the point at which they are not engaging with the system that leads to a decision, we have withdrawn their claim.
So you tick them off the list, but they haven't gone home.
They haven't
gone home.
I don't know.
We don't know. So you have no idea where those 17,316 people are.
I don't think we know where all those people are. No.
You have no idea. Thank you very much, Chair.
That's a chap called Simon Ridley there. A quick Google search of his name reveals he hosted a masterclass for young people looking to learn about the civil service. Presumably, that masterclass lasted about 30 seconds. He couldn't answer any questions and he got lost trying to get there. You know, the public really care about illegal migrants being deported. It's quite a big deal, I think, isn't it? Well.
How many people travelling on small boats that's been refused asylum have been sent to a third country or back to their own country over the past 3 years?
I don't think we have. I
think we'll write to the committee with those numbers, Mr. Anderson. That's staggering. That's actually staggering. Okay, then let's do it for the last year.
I don't have a number for non-Albanian, non-FNOs.
Perhaps they might be able to help you.
Let's do last week then.
Do we have any figures about anything?
Sir Matthew Rycroft there, a man who, according to the government's website, is paid around £103,000 a year. He has received bonuses and was knighted despite overseeing record levels of net migration. Presumably that was for services to open borders. The arrogance and obnoxious entitlement on display there. To think that you can turn up and perform like that. Well, in 2022 to 23, figures show that 20 leading civil servants who run the UK government departments had an average pension pot of £1.1 million. Combined, these pension pots were worth just under 21 million quid. I'll round it up slightly. Of these, 10 had pension pots worth more than the lifetime allowance currently set at just over 1 million quid. According to the Taxpayers Alliance, Sir Philip Barton, Permanent Under-Secretary at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, had the largest pension pot worth more than 2 million quid last year. During the withdrawal from Afghanistan, Sir Philip reportedly stayed on holiday until 11 days after the Taliban retook Kabul. How on earth is the government supposed to do anything with these clowns tasked with enforcing their policies? I mean, they just don't look like they care. I'm a taxpayer and I want my money back. Politicians get voted in and out. They get all the stick. But hang on a minute. This lot are taking our money, wheelbarrows of the stuff, and they are just turning up to a scrutiny meeting with no answers. If you performed like that at where you work, you'd get sacked, wouldn't you? There's history here, though, isn't there? Dominic Raab was ousted over bullying claims, which apparently included him getting a little bit miffed because one civil servant nearly handed Gibraltar back to the Spanish without a single shot being fired. There's an aggressive work-from-home culture. Apparently nearly 2/5 of civil servants would consider quitting if they're made to do 3 days a week in the office. There was a lot of controversy about Partygate investigator Sue Gray, whose son has just been selected to run as the Labour MP for Beckenham and Penge. She's now Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff. Now, of course, there was never found to be any issue there in terms of her being compromised in any way. There is clearly a layer of apathy, arrogance and incompetence behind a layer of weak government. If Sunak had any strength, he'd get rid of Laurel and Hardy from the Home Office and replace them with people who at least look like they care. Well, let's get the thoughts of my panel now. Daily Telegraph columnist Madeleine Grant, I've got Conservative peer Lord Bailey, and I've got author and broadcaster, the wonderful Amy Nicole Turner. Madeleine, I'll start with you. Do they need to be sacked?
Well, I mean, I think that was absolutely shameless as a display. I think it shows a level of contempt for the general public. I think if this were a business, heads would roll according to on this basis. I don't know exactly. I mean, it's not done for the Prime Minister to interfere in the inner workings of the civil service, but this is the kind of outing that really gives you an insight into the pushback that government ministers are experiencing when they try to actually implement the kind of policies that people in Britain want to see enacted and the grave concern that many people feel about migration and channel migrants.
I thought that actually pulled back the curtain on the reality of it. It's all very well and good me sitting here and giving Rishi Sunak both barrels and all of this stuff, but the reality is, if that's what he's up against, if those are the people who are tasked with implementing not just government policy but also the will of the people, we've got no chance, have we?
Look, if you look at those two men, it's one poor performance, and in their careers they may have 100 good ones, but it points to something more important. It's politicians that we give all the ire to, and the civil service skate by. Now, there's vast parts of civil service that work brilliantly, but there's clearly some problems here. But it looks to me that the civil service are beyond reproach. Who is watching the watchmen? So if you're a civil servant, very senior civil servant, you have time and you just think, I'll wait until somebody removes this politician who I don't like or doesn't do what I want to do. Yeah. If you're a civil servant, that's not the case. And why I think that's important to acknowledge, because if you look at other states across the world, America, for example, those politicians bring in their civil servants and they leave with those civil servants. And what that means is a greater level of accountability. Because let's be clear, unless the likes of you keep on about this story will just disappear into the ether.
I find it absolutely staggering, honestly. I mean, there's a lot to this, right? But the idea that you would turn up to a meeting like that as unprepared, that, for me, shows a level of disdain for what is one of, if not the major issue of the day for a lot of people out there. I know a lot of people watching and listening to this. Amy, what did you make of that, then? Do you think that they should go as a result of this?
I think you've picked the wrong villain here.
Oh.
I've seen plenty more ministers turning up to committee meetings. I'll name one, Suella, when she was asked to simply cost the Rwanda deal, and she simply couldn't. She couldn't do it. She couldn't present the figures. I think it's incredibly important to note that we always cherry pick out the civil servants who earn these great big pensions. Your average civil servant is just about scraping by. It's really unfair to characterise them as these moneyed. We always like to think of them at home, working from home on their pelotons, that sort of image. And really, a lot of them are working. They're working incredibly hard to take policies that can't be implemented, are completely impractical, and they can see that, and they're just.
Here's an excuse for not knowing this. See, this is the thing, right? You know, to not be able to answer basic questions, for me, just shows you, in my view, you don't care.
The bottom line is this. So we've talked about ministers failing, but if you're a punter and you look at the people behind the ministers, it starts to answer some questions for you. And let's be clear, vast parts of the civil service are just normal working people, but their pensions are still quite far ahead of normal ordinary people. The civil service should be rewarded properly, but they should also work properly. The aggressive work-from-home culture is beginning to show itself in a lack of...
But it's just frustrating when you blame terrible, impossible, impractical government policy on civil servants.
It's not impractical to know how many people have been...
I think that the idea that you would have 70,000 asylum seekers who, for whatever reason, their claims don't progress any further, they don't have any claim to be in the country any longer, and they just literally disappear, and no one knows where they are, no one is keeping tabs on them, and then they turn up to a committee unable to answer the most basic questions about their own brief. Imagine if you were the CFO of a company and you went to like an AGM and you couldn't tell the shareholders like what your annual revenue was. I mean, it's that equivalent of something so basic.
Is there something more sinister going on? And we're going to get both sides of this, but is this a lot of people in the civil service who have got an anti-Tory bias? Are they actively not working towards it? Maybe they think, look, Rishi's only got... It's been a circus, and Rishi's only got a year and a bit left. I can't be bothered to do any of this stuff. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that might be part of it. I also just think that there's a real problem of the civil service has really departed from its original mentality of understanding that things could be apolitical and that you had a duty. And, of course, when a government is weak, I think the civil service and, for want of a better word, the blob will kind of expand to fill that void. The blob does quite well in chaos, and we've had a lot of turnover of prime ministers in the last few years.
That's what... There can't be great morale if you're constantly being berated and called the blob.
But maybe you should be...
But then you see
recognise
stuff like... You see stuff like
that's supposed to go hand in hand.
The thing is with the blob is that I know it's not an ideal word, but then you read about stuff like that we're going to be talking about a story shortly, in which it became clear that Steve Barclay had various proposals to try to reduce the numbers of migrants.
Those proposals were outrageous.
This is an important thing.
That's an example of an impractical policy and a civil servant doing its job.
No, it's not. That's actually wrong. It's not their job. The civil service should be invisible. They should not have an opinion one way or the other.
No,
they should just act.
No opinion, but they have to look at whether it's possible to implement the practicalities.
We have political systems to do that. I sit in one every day. I sit in one. The civil service are becoming an activist service, and that's where the problem lies. If the civil service are asked to do something and it works out badly, but they've carried it out to the letter, they can quite happily point fingers at politicians. But if you look what happened to Amber Rudd, for instance, it starts to show you that some people in the civil service are acting.
But they've got to look at the feasibility,
the legality. Dominic Raab as well, I mean, some of the things that ended up doing for him were him, I would argue, getting quite rightfully frustrated at stuff not getting done. And when you look at some of the potential mistakes that were in there, this idea that, Gibraltar might have been handed back to the Spanish without a shot being fired. I mean, I'd get angry about
that. But they're being put forward these unfeasible, often illegal, completely impractical policies, so they're not going to be able to push them through and work on them. They're impossible to work on.
That's simply not correct. For instance, if
it might be correct in terms of Rwanda.
That's a good one. The dependence that you were talking about, unethical.
I hate it because if it's illegal, that's what our legal system is for. We have a Supreme Court. We have some of the best lawyers.
What's the point of working on it, spending loads of money on it if it's impossible to implement? Their job is to be the checks and balance of the policy in terms of in an unbiased way.
I think you're confusing two things here. I mean, even putting Rwanda aside, I don't think it should be controversial if a minister says that you could have more of a guest worker scheme where people come and they don't bring family members with them. We should push for that. that. That's not an insane policy.
I think that's
You're
unethical.
Why?
Yeah, but if you were a civil servant,
because you're the Conservative. You love the nuclear family. Let's keep them together at least.
Okay, fine,
come
but
on.
is this not the
mean
point?
You have to pay for dependence, and if the public doesn't want that, and if people are happy to come without dependence, that shouldn't be beyond the
But is this not the point, though, Amy? And very finally on this, if that policy is not illegal, right, which it is,
which the courts would decide,
which the courts would decide anyway, and an elected government official wants to implement that policy, and you are a civil servant, you shouldn't really say, well, I'm morally opposed to it, so I'm not going to do it.
No, it's not morally opposed. It's from a completely neutral, impartial, apolitical way to say that is unethical.
No, if you use the word... Hold on.
through.
The word ethic means you've had an opinion. The only people to have an opinion are the politicians and the law. Civil servants should just...
Well, I'll tell you a story that everyone's got an opinion on, OK? It's the travellers' community, OK? Because the Supreme Court, our friends, rules that councils can ban travellers from their land. Is it right to get tougher on the travelling community, or are they victims of one of the last forms of quote-unquote acceptable racism? I'm going to be joined by Irish traveller and former star of My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, Paddy Doherty, and he hits out to what he calls discrimination against his people shortly. But first, as BBC radio star Nihal sparks controversy by claiming that he struggles with an overwhelmingly white working environment. Should skin colour really matter in the workplace? BBC legend Liz Kershaw, who claims that she was ostracised at the Beeb, weighs in. That's next, don't move.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
News channel.
Coming up, star of Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, Paddy Doherty, unleashes on the Supreme Court's decision to allow councils to get tough with traveller communities. Do you think that's fair enough? Have you had some nightmare experiences, or do you think maybe it's actual racism? But first, yet another BBC star has hit the headlines. This time, it's the turn of Radio 5 live presenter Nihal Arthanika, who's claimed that an overwhelmingly white working environment is affecting his mental health. Speaking to a journalism diversity conference yesterday, the presenter said this: "It's really affecting me, that I walk in and all I see is white people. The hardest thing is to walk into a room, look around, and nobody looks like you." And in a further blow, Nihal blasted the Beeb for not having, quotes, a single Muslim involved in the senior editorial processes at Radio 5 Live. Well, I'm joined now by the legendary journalist and DJ Liz Kershaw, who works at the BBC for over 30 years. Liz, thank you very, very much. What do you make of Nihal's comments? Do you think that, you know, it's actually OK to suggest that if you walk into a room and it's predominantly one race of people, that could be damaging for your mental health?
Well, hiya, and it was over 35 years, Patrick, 1987, 22. When I first walked, first of all, I'd like to say that everybody, if they see something's wrong, should feel they can speak up about it. I always did. Often it does you no favours, but I believe in that. But when I first walked into the BBC nationally in 1987 to Radio 1, you know, there were no women there. And there were three female presenters and 25 male presenters. And I fought till late 2018, before it was decreed by the Director General, after I'd written a report analysing all the airtime and what percentage of it was presented by women, which even then was only 17%. I presented a report to the Director General. That went to Parliament. Questions were asked in the House. And then finally, Tony Hall declared that 20% of on-air people, whether they were guests or presenters or contributors, 20% should be non-white. And then June Sarpong was brought in as the diversity czar for 180,000 a year for half a day a week, and she made sure that was implemented. So really good people were removed from their shows to get that quota up. Now, he's there. And by the way, can I say, bless him, I don't think he's thought this through. I've worked with him. He probably didn't prepare properly. He probably spoke spontaneously, probably didn't have the facts at his fingertips. And he was in an environment where he was under pressure to say something audience-pleasing. And we know the title of the conference. But he said he feels that it's predominantly white and he's outnumbered. Well, the UK is predominantly white. And whatever it is, whether it's TV ads or dramas or news broadcasts, should reflect the percentages in the population, the real population. And in this country, we're talking about non-white and white, then 13% of the population is not white and 9% are Asians. He started introducing religion and talked about Muslims in BBC management. Well, 3.5% of people in this country currently, 6.5% of these people in this country are currently Muslim. So it can't expect them to be a majority in the BBC. It's got to reflect.
I mean, the BBC does have the BBC's Asian network as well, to be honest, which I think you've got some strong views on that. Go on.
Yeah, I've argued they set up the Asian network and they set up One Extra. And the Asian network was what it says for Asian people living in this country. And One Extra was all about black music, urban music, that culture, music of black origin, mobile, whatever. And I said, this is wrong. all radio should be inclusive of all people and cultures that live in our British society. And that's for the good of everyone. And as for Asians and black people, they're being ghettoised by the BBC. It's like some posh person in a suit has sat in Broadcasting House and said, "Oh, we better give these people their own little radio station so they don't bother us." And that's always bothered me. So if I walk in there, then I'm outnumbered. If at one point we had to broadcast from the One Extra studios because I was at Six Music, were being upgraded, and I was the only white face in there at points. But that's what that was set up for. I really think he's a very silly boy, because if you look at the 5 Live schedule, if you look at what they call daytime, peak time, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m, he presents 3 hours of that, 3 hours of 12. So he's presenting 25% of that station's output on a weekday peak time. And I really don't think it's got anything to groan about. He's done very well in the BBC.
Oh, I mean, I'll let you go on then, because you just made a series of really, really interesting points.
Northerner, you know, we're both Northerners.
Yeah.
The other thing that I noticed when I got to the BBC was I was a Northerner, and that was alien. The Sun even did a big spread. This woman needs subtitles. Nobody can understand what she's talking about. That's awful. Last year, I was interviewed on a local radio station, a BBC local radio station, where I used to present the breakfast show. And this person said to me, "What were you doing on this station? You're not even from this area." So after the programme, I thought about it and I was upset. So I rang up and asked to talk to the managing editor of the station, who happened to be Asian. And I said to him, I was telling him, and he was dismissing it. And I said to him, "How would you feel if somebody said to you, 'Why are you running this station? You're not even from here.'" And he said, "Right, you're racist," and put the phone down on me. You know, it's taken years for Northerners to be accepted in the media. In fact, it's gone the other way. And I paid for my son to go to a public school so he wouldn't have to contend with the barriers that I have had to. And now he's too posh. He couldn't your job. Too posh.
You can't. I think you're alluding to the idea that you just can't win. Well, it's interesting. We're going to return into this a bit later on, because we've correlated some facts and figures about BBC's diversity quotas and diversity drives, and how people who are white can't actually apply for things. It's not to diminish. Look, if the thing is, if Nihal genuinely feels like that, right, then that's his version of his own lived experience, and I'm sympathetic towards that. Obviously, I mean, you know, I don't know what his lived experience necessarily is. I think there are question marks about whether he really meant it. I think a lot of people feel as though, is it really true that when you walk into the BBC, you're presented with an ocean of white people, and that really damages your mental health? I'm not convinced, but we're going to have to leave it there for now, I'm afraid. We'll probably end up having our own show at some point together soon. I enjoyed that. Or that might be too many Northerners on telly at the same time. No, we don't have those rules here at GB News. Liz, you take care. Now, a spokesperson for the BBC said, "We want everyone who works at the BBC and those considering a career with us to know we are focused on creating an inclusive culture where everyone feels they belong." It'll be interesting to see how they react to this now, won't it? But coming up, a story that has shocked many today. A policeman responsible for this tasering of a 10-year-old girl got off scot-free.
Down now, put him down now!
Yeah, we'll reveal all a little bit later on. There is more to that story than meets the eye, although it just raised the question, is it ever really OK to taser a child? But there we go. I'll show you what happened when Anne Widdecombe cast her verdict on the merits of arming cops with tasers shortly. She'll also answer whether or not Piers Morgan has fallen into Omid Scobie's trap by outrageously revealing the so-called royal racists' identities. Don't miss that. But first, Irish traveller and star of Big Brother and My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding, Paddy Doherty, explains why a new Supreme Court ruling against travellers represents discrimination. Plain and simple. Where are you on this? Do you think it is about time that councils got tough on travellers? Don't go anywhere.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
All right, now I want to hear from you, OK? GBViews at gbnews.com. It's a controversial topic, this, but when have we ever shied away from that, hey? So, are councils right, buoyed by a Supreme Court ruling, to get tough on the travelling community? Now, some people think, mainly from the travelling community, that the only acceptable form of racism left, I'm air quoting there for anyone listening on radio, is against the travelling community, you know, not allowed to have weddings at hotels, venues cancelling on them, people talking nastily about them quite openly in pubs or just amongst their friends, etc. You know, is that really... You don't hear that really about any kind of other demographic of people, do you? So I want to hear from you on this. Or, you know, have you had some negative experience with the travelling community? GBViews at gbnews.com. Let me know on that one. But before I do that, I'm just going to return very, very quickly now to a question I posed, you wonderful individuals, earlier on. Should Home Office civil servants be sacked for not knowing how many asylum seekers are on the run? Lee, yes. Sue, yes. Steve, yes. Truth Hurts on Twitter says get rid of the Home Office entirely. You've gone nuclear there. So there's quite a lot of this. And a wonderful email in gbviews at gbnews.com from another Sue, lots of Sues in tonight, saying the clue is in the job description, civil servant, i.e. you serve the country, not run it. So there we go. But yes, as I would say, in a major blow to the travelling community, they are being made to disband or disperse That's after a Supreme Court ruling banned them from living on council-owned land to clamp down on unauthorised mass settling. So 38 councils have set up no-go zones to stop families pitching up in parks, fields and roadside verges without permission. Tory MP Sir Peter Bottomley from the all-party parliamentary group for Gypsies, Travellers and Roma said this: unauthorised caravanning should not continue. There's a difference between one traveller household finding spare land to rest at, and that is a contrast to 20 or 40 or 60 modern vehicles, with modern caravans taking over public space and making life uncomfortable for regular users. Interesting one, really. Where I grew up, there were quite regular traveller sites that would pop up from time to time every now and again. And I know, speaking to people who owned those bits of land, that it was very, very difficult to get them off there. There was one time, locally to me, in my local park, where they turned up in that park and stayed there for a couple of weeks. And then when they left, there was rubbish mounding up everywhere, there was human excrement, there was all of this stuff, and it cost the local taxpayer thousands of pounds for the council to come and clean that up. There are notable situations as well, aren't there, of people finding it very, very difficult to actually remove them from these sites, and whether or not you think that's OK. I believe we might be able to bring in Anne Widdicombe now on this very, very topic. Of course, a tour de force in British politics. Anne, thank you very, very much. How do you feel about this, then? Do you think that it's right that the travelling community should be clamped down on more by local councils?
Well, I can't believe that it's taken this long. I mean, when I was a Member of Parliament, I was a Member of Parliament for 23 years, and I encountered exactly this problem with illegal encampments, which left a lot of mess, was the source of crime, etc., etc. And I encountered that very early, and it was still going on. I mean, not in exactly the same places, but it was still going on as a problem when I left 23 years later, and it's something that nobody's really been prepared to get to grips with. Now, the counter side of this is that there are perfectly respectable members of the travelling community, and they do need some provision.
OK, all right, well, look, hopefully, shortly, we might be able to speak to Paddy Doherty, the king of the travellers, as he's referred to, star of Big Fat Gypsy Wedding and also Big Brother, so hopefully we'll be able to bring Paddy in. But some people would say that there is discrimination against the traveller community. They get called slurs, that if a wedding venue finds out that that's a traveller wedding or a gypsy wedding, often they cancel it. You know, do you think that that's a form of racism?
Well, you've got to ask why they're so unwilling. And it isn't just because of discrimination or because they don't happen to like travellers. It's not that at all. It's the sum of experience over years of what can happen. Now, you don't tar all football supporters going abroad for the antics of some who bring Britain into disrepute. But, of course, people get very wary. And this is what's happening here. People are getting wary. And I think it might help if those who are sensible, respectable, law-abiding, educate their kids, etc., those who do all those things and belong to travelling communities, actually put a bit more pressure on the others to stop giving them such a bad reputation.
Well, look, Anne, thank you very much for doing a bit of overtime for us. I'm going to return to you, so stay where you are at. Don't you dare move, OK? I'll come back to you, but we can bring in Paddy Doherty now. I really hope we can. The former star of Big Brother. Yes, there he is. Good lad. Thank you very, very much, Paddy. Now, I know you've got some strong views on this, haven't you? How do you feel about councils getting tough on the traveller community?
Well, like Anne just said it there, yeah? It can't be any worse than what it is now, yeah? Right, you've slowly moved us into sites. We're in sites now. All of a sudden now, you want every traveller. This is the way it's going to be. It's going to be every traveller has got to move into a house. We can't help how we're born. When you're born from your generation, you're born from that. It's like the royal family. They're born into royalty. You're born, like I'm born a traveller. I've never denied my race for the rest of my life. Never would. And that goes for every traveller. English, Irish, Welsh, Scotch, American. We're all in one community. We're travellers. We're not dirty gypsies. We're travellers. You know, and could you do that? What you're saying there, like move everyone off. You couldn't do that to New Age travellers. You know who the New Age travellers is? They're the hippie travellers, yeah? And every place my community goes to in North Wales, when it goes on campsite, they form the council up, and you can check on this. They phone the council up and ask, can you bring bins out and a public toilet out? And the council does that because they're not only going to be there for 2 weeks, and then they move on. And I haven't seen a site yet what's left rough. Yes, years ago it used to be to get wagons and tip stuff up and all that, but that's finished. Them days is gone. Our day is slowly gone, and no one's done it. Only the communities, the House of Parliament is doing it because they look us like we're rubbish.
So you see this, Paddy, you see this as an attack on your culture, I think, don't you? And you've made some incredibly strong points there. Well, look, Paddy, I wish you all the best. I'm sorry that we couldn't have a little bit longer with you because we had some connection issues, but hopefully I'll get you back on. And thank you very much for coming on and putting your side of it up. So that is, of course, Paddy Doherty there, TV personality, former star of Big Fat Gypsy Weddings. Thank you very, very much. Now, coming up, as the world's leaders jet into the oil-rich human rights hellscape that is the United Arab Emirates for COP28 climate conference. Are the elites in attendance shameful eco and human rights hypocrites? I discussed that with human rights lawyers David Haig, who has suffered a harrowing experience in a Dubai prison. But next, controversy as the cop behind this tasering of a 10-year-old girl is cleared of misconduct.
Down now, put him down now!
I'll show you the full clip when Anne Whittaker makes a glorious return and asks if the Bobby in question was actually in the right. She'll also answer whether Piers Morgan has unwittingly fallen into Omid Scobie's trap by outrageously revealing the so-called royal racist. Back in a tick.
You know, I've been a pop star, I've been a TV presenter, I've danced on Strictly, I've faced some of my biggest fears on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to face my biggest challenge of all by joining GB News with Ellie Costello and Peter Andre.
For the brightest start to your weekend with all the news, the biggest stories, plus some special guests.
Join me, Peter Andre.
And me, Ellie Costello, for Saturday Morning Live from 10.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christys Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christys Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, Met Officer PC Jonathan Broadhead has been cleared of gross misconduct after tasering a 10-year-old girl who threatened her mother with garden shears. Here's the dramatic footage showing how police pursued the girl through her house before opening up.
Hello.
Yeah.
Put it down now. Put him down now.
Mate, can you do the next one?
Put him down now. Please don't do the taser. Take the taser. Right, put your taser in your point. Do not. Stay down. Stay down. Put your arms out. Put your arms out now. Out on top of your head. Right. Stand up. Face that wall.
Great. Right, well, Commander John Saville defended PC Broadhead's use of the taser in this circumstance, saying tasers provide officers with the ability to de-escalate situations and protect others from harm. Giving evidence on Tuesday, the Met officer said this: "I was worried that her intentions were with the shears. Taser was the best option I had." Well, Anne, can the police be trusted with tasers? I mean, it does look a little bit egregious. Anne Widdicombe rejoins us, by the way. Welcome back to the fray. Anne, yeah, should police officers be using tasers against kids?
Yes, if the circumstances demand it. You've shown a very dramatic episode there. What you didn't show us was the equally dramatic call from the mother, who was scared of the child, who'd already hit her with a hammer, who was waving shears, of all things, around, and who allegedly also was suspected of having drugs in her. Now, the police went into that situation. If they hadn't used tasers, if they tried to physically get the shears from her, and they were injured, then you and all these other people who are condemning the police would be full of sympathy and saying it's not fair that the police have to face these situations. They did what I believe was proportionate time, and that is why the officer has been cleared. Now, if he'd just gone in and started using it gratuitously, he wouldn't have been cleared.
No, it's interesting because you can argue, very well, in fact it was argued successfully, that in that situation it's absolutely fine to use a taser against a child. Do you feel comfortable with all police officers walking around with tasers?
Well, yes, I do. I would prefer them to be using tasers than guns. And I think that they do need, they need protection against criminals. They need protection. And if they have no other choice, I'd much rather they use a taser than a gun. So, yes, I am perfectly happy with this. Are we going to back the police in the fight against crime? Or every time something difficult like this happens, are we going to turn against the police? Now, our decision.
Yeah, I mean, you can argue that's exactly what a taser is for, and the police have to be blind in that situation. If there is report that someone has hit someone with a hammer and they're currently waving garden shears around and they don't do exactly what you do, then get the taser out and crack on. But a convicted criminal was taken off a deportation flight, Anne. Different story, this, but I think, yeah, equally good talking point. So he's taken off a deportation flight and back to his home country, so didn't go back to his home country, after rebel passengers refused to sit down on the plane. So the Jamaican crook was helped by a 26-year-old Mancunian called Hannah Gaffey. The former Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has criticised the Cambridge University-educated Brit, classic, saying anyone who deliberately stops the removal of a foreign national offender should face the courts for the taxpayers' funds their actions are consuming, for the wasted legal and court time that they are racking up, and for effectively standing by dangerous criminals who are a threat to the British public. What do you think here, Anne? I mean, if that was me, I'd be gutted I didn't get to go to Jamaica.
Well, I mean, as last time this happened, of course, when passengers thwarted a deportation, it turned out it was a rapist. And the poor victim had to endure the fact that he then stayed for years before the Home Office finally managed to deport him. And as far as I'm concerned, the instant that Hannah Gaffey refused to sit down, she should have been removed from the aircraft. Not the crook she should have been removed from the aircraft. It would have been a big deterrent to other passengers. And I'm totally with Priti Patel. If you do that sort of thing, then you must face the courts. And she said she felt elated. I think, as I said in my Express column, very good column, by the way, every Wednesday, as I said in my Express column, I think she should be made to face the victims and tell them how elated she feels.
Yeah, no, indeed. This idea that you can get in the way and stop things without knowing what these people have done, for me, is arguably the most unintelligent approach to the kind of open borders, anti-deportation thing whatsoever. When you say to them, do you know whether or not that person has murdered or raped someone or is a terrorist? And if your answer to that is no, then maybe, just maybe, you have to assume that our security services are doing their job right. But I've just about got time, Anne, for something that broke not too long before we came on air, because the Dutch translator of Omid Scobie's book Endgame has sensationally revealed that the name of the two so-called royal racists were in the manuscript, despite the author insisting they never submitted a book with them in it. Meanwhile, the palace is reportedly considering legal action after Piers Morgan did make their identities public. Our channel won't be doing that, apparently. Anne, what's your views on that, then?
Look, it is utterly impossible that a manuscript was provided which had no names at all, and then the publishers put in two names. That is impossible. That did not happen. I don't believe that happened. So I think that the names were there. I think quite likely it was an earlier draft, and maybe Omid Scobie did not intend that they should be made public. But there's no way they weren't there at all.
I just wonder, Anne, if Piers has fallen into a little bit of a trap here, you know, and that they wanted him to end up blowing his top like that and maybe facing some consequences. What do you think?
Well, I think certainly, you know, he's put the names into the public domain, which he should not have done. Interestingly, Tom Bauer, in his book, named the supposedly royal racist, and it wasn't either of them. So we've now got three characters in the frame. I think the situation is that there was just very innocent conversation going on. You know, you ask what colour a child's hair might be. And, you know, I know people in mixed marriages who've had such conversations. I think it was all innocent. I think Omid Scobie is a nasty, vengeful type.
Right, strong stuff, Anne. Thank you very, very much, as ever. You take care. That is Anne Widdecombe, their former Conservative minister. Right now, coming up, arriving by private jet, rubbing shoulders with other elites in an oil state with a abominable human rights record. That doesn't sound like a serious climate conference, does it? But that's COP28, everybody. Now, shortly, I'll be joined by the human rights lawyer David Haig, who had an absolutely harrowing experience in a Dubai prison, as he hits out at the pampered politicians attending the Hypocrisy Convention in the UAE. I will also be revealing something very special on tomorrow's show. I will be having a world exclusive, an interview that a lot of people wanted to get, a heck of a lot of people wanted to get. I'll be telling you exactly who I have lined up for you tomorrow for a long set-piece interview. It'll be probably about 20 minutes or half an hour. And, yeah, I'll tell you who that is very, very shortly. But next, my panel returns to debate if the BBC and society is too obsessed with diversity after Radio 5-star Nihal said that he struggled with his overwhelmingly white working environment. Well, were those comments themselves actually racist? We'll get stuck in, I promise you. It's probably going to kick off. Don't go anywhere.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Friday is going to be another dry day for many of us, but it will be feeling very cold once again, with potentially some freezing fog to start and some snow showers. We've seen snow as a result of this frontal system bumping into the cold air across parts of the southwest. That will clear away throughout the course of the night, but it will leave with it a risk of ice on the roads across parts of Devon and Cornwall. There's also a risk of some ice across the northeast of England, as well as many eastern areas of Scotland as a result of the snow showers. You could also see some icy stretches across parts of Northern Ireland. So it'll be another very cold start tomorrow morning. It could be as low as -7, -8 once again. There'll also be some freezing fog patches across many central and eastern areas. These could be quite slow to clear. There'll also be some showers starting to come in across parts of Suffolk, we could see some sleetiness within this as well. But for many of us, it will be a dry day with some winter sunshine, but temperatures still really struggling, 2 or 3 degrees at best in many places. And then Saturday is going to start on a very cold note. We could be down as low as minus double digits. Some crisp sunshine to be had, mostly across northeastern areas this time, with showers moving in from the west. These showers could fall as snow over the high ground of Wales and potentially across central areas as well. But things turn somewhat less cold early next week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10 p.m. and this is Patrick Christys Tonight.
Really don't think it's got anything to groan about. It's done very well in the BBC.
Well, BBC veteran Liz Kershaw hits out at BBC star Nihal for saying the Beeb's white working environment gives him mental health problems. The Beeb does have a diversity problem. They're too obsessed with it. And I am not making this up. COP28, the climate conference to save humanity, is taking place in a Middle Eastern oil state with an abominable human rights record, and they're all flying in using private jets. I talked to a survivor of human rights atrocities in Dubai and a climate activist who also hates this awful charade. They've pleased nobody. And tomorrow, I have a world exclusive for you.
Why do you love him so much?
Shortly, I'll reveal who my mystery guest is. It's a good one, I think you will like it. And tune in for tomorrow's newspaper front pages and what's inside the book, as well as my press pack. Getting busy on the sofa tonight. We've got the Telegraph star Madeline Grant, we've got Lord Sean Bailey and the ever-punchy Amy Nicole Turner. Not a wave in sight. This is Patrick Christys Tonight, and we're live. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. Is it racist to say an office is too white? At GBViews on Twitter. It's all action after your headlines.
This very good evening to you, Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. First, some breaking news. Another 6 Israeli hostages have been released from Gaza, bringing the total so far today to 8. The Israeli army says they are now with the Red Cross and on their way back to Israel. Earlier, Hamas handed over 2 female hostages, the French-Israeli Mia Skem, who was kidnapped from the Supernova Music Festival, and the lawyer Ahmed Susanna. 30 more Palestinian prisoners are expected to be released from an Israeli jail in the West Bank shortly. Meanwhile, efforts are ongoing in an effort to extend the current truce before it expires in the coming hours. Meanwhile, America's top diplomat says Israel must protect civilian lives in Gaza before it continues its military operations. Antony Blinken insists the immediate priority is to extend the temporary ceasefire beyond the current 7 days. And while he says the US will continue to support Israel's efforts to eliminate Hamas, the loss of life in northern Gaza cannot be repeated in the south.
Israel has the right to do everything it can to ensure that the slaughter Hamas carried out on October 7th can never be repeated. Hamas cannot remain in control of Gaza. It cannot retain the capacity to repeat that carnage. But as I've also said since I first came here after October 7th, the way Israel defends itself matters. Before Israel resumes major military operations, it must put in place humanitarian civilian protection plans that minimize further casualties of innocent Palestinians.
In the UK, Matt Hancock says a culture of fear inside Downing Street created by Boris Johnson's chief advisor undermined the government's pandemic response. The former health secretary has described Dominic Cummings as a malign actor at the COVID inquiry and said the country should have gone into lockdown 3 weeks sooner.
If we'd had the doctrine that I propose, which is as soon as you know you've got a lockdown, you lock down as soon as possible, then we would have got the lockdown done over that weekend, in on the 2nd of March, 3 weeks earlier than before. There's a doubling rate at this point estimated every 3 to 4 days. We would have been 6 doublings ahead of where we were, which means that fewer than a tenth of the number of people would have died in the first wave.
Tributes have been paid from both sides of the political divide to the former Labour Chancellor Alistair Darling, who's died at the age of 70. Lord Darling served as a cabinet minister for 13 years under both Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, who praised his wisdom, calmness in a crisis and his humour. The Prime Minister says he was a dedicated politician who served the country through challenging times, and the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer's described his loss to those who knew him as immeasurable.
Alistair's death has caused a shock and a profound sadness across not just the whole Labour movement, but across everybody who loved him and respected him. And that's basically everybody who knew him. He was the dedicated public servant. He was kind. I was privileged to know him as a friend and to have his advice. And our hearts go out to Maggie, his wife, and their children on this very, very sad day.
And at least 3 police officers have been injured in pre-match clashes in Birmingham ahead of Aston Villa's match against Legia Warsaw. West Midlands Police say fans of the Polish side wouldn't be allowed into the stadium after missiles were thrown at officers ahead of the game in the Europa Conference League. Aston Villa have just won the game 2-1. A significant policing operation continues. Well, this is GB News on TV, digital radio and on your smart speaker too. That's it for the moment. Now it's over to Patrick.
The BBC isn't woke enough. That's the kind of joke that would end up on Mock the Week's cutting room floor. But believe it or not, that's the strongly held view of one of its employees. We've got Radio 5 presenter Nihal Arthanika. Speaking to a journalism diversity conference yesterday, he revealed working in the BBC's, quote, overwhelmingly white environment is affecting his mental health. Nihal continued, it's really affecting me that I walk in and all I see is white people. The hardest thing is to walk into a room, look around, and nobody looks like you. He also complained that there wasn't a Muslim person in senior editorial positions. OK, that's Nihal's alleged lived experience, and I respect that. But does he think that he's working for BLM instead of the BBC? I mean, the population of England and Wales is 82% white. So does the population in general give him mental health problems? Well, that's kind of what I want to know here. Does just walking around give him mental health problems? In reality, our state broadcaster is fanatical about diversity and inclusion. Just look at the facts. The BBC have committed to at least 20% black, Asian and minority ethnic staff, even though that demographic accounts for just 18% of the population. In 2021, they banned white people from applying to a trainee job on Springwatch and The One Show. White people have not really recovered from that, of course. They have the BBC Asian network, described as a radio station featuring music and speech likely to appeal to those with an interest in British Asian lifestyles. One presenter there recently shared an image on social media with the slogan, "From the river to the sea." And then there's Guz Khan, isn't there? The Muslim comic who's been booked to host Have I Got News for You, who's accused Israel of committing war crimes and partaking in ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. He was also dropped from an Uber Eats ad after casting aspersions about Priti Patel's own Asian heritage. Meanwhile, I've just spoken with Liz Kershaw, who is just one of several broadcasting veterans to be unceremoniously dumped by the Beeb. She keeps company with the likes of Ken Bruce, Steve Wright, Sue Barker, Vanessa Feltz, Jeremy Clarkson. How many other over 60s does Nihal actually see in his plush BBC studios? Do you think his employer actually maybe has a problem with ageism more than diversity? These are questions I would love to pose to Nihal, but of course he's decided not to respond to our request to appear on the show or provide a statement. Now, look, I don't claim to have Nihal's own personal lived experience, but if a white BBC employee stood on stage and said that working with many ethnic minorities is bad for their mental health, I'm not sure they'd have a job to go to the next day. So, does the BBC really have a problem when it comes to diversity and inclusion, or are they actually just totally consumed by it? To respond, I've got Daily Telegraph columnist Madeline Grant, I've got Conservative peer Lord Bailey and author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. Sean, I'll go to you first on this. What do you reckon to that?
I mean, look, I'll go to your stat first. If he can't be around white people, he's either campaigning for apartheid or campaigning for unemployment. He needs to make his mind up there, because the fact that 82% of the people in this country are white.
OK, just slight issue with you, Mike. We'll get that turned on very, very quickly. Madeline, your views?
Yeah, I just think it's kind of... I thought the language was very interesting. You know, he talked of feeling sort of distressed mentally, emotionally and so forth. And I think, although this is obviously like a very divisive thing for someone to say, especially someone who's working for, you know, the state broadcaster and in receipt of the taxpayer money, I think it's too easy to just single out Nihal, because this kind of rhetoric is actually very, very common. All sorts of workplaces across the country, people have completely bought into the divisive logic of identity politics. And these kind of policies are being enacted by HR departments across the country right now. So I think the problem goes a lot further than just this one individual.
OK, Amy, your take on this. Do you think that it's a bit racist, actually, to come out and say that kind of stuff?
I don't think it's racist, and this is why. I think we need to look at the intention of what he said and the context of where he said it. So he said it at a diversity and inclusion event for underrepresented groups in journalism, and I think his intention was just to demonstrate that there is an underrepresentation in journalism.
To say it gives him mental health problems?
I think it was quite heavy, quite clumsy, but I think his intention was just to demonstrate and to provoke a discussion about why there is still underrepresentation within journalism, which could be due to things like barriers.
I see what you're saying, Amy. I see what you're saying, but of course, he never said that. He never said that at all. He said that going to work with white people gave him mental health problems. And I go back to my point, most people in this country are white, so he's either campaigning for unemployment or campaigning for apartheid. He needs to make his mind up. But the most important thing is a divisive statement is driving a wedge between communities. You know, there's a point where, you know, people of colour have faced racism in this country and we've fought it for years. But there's a point, if you keep accusing white people of being racist for absolutely no reason, then they'll just be racist.
Or just existing in this case.
But we don't want to discourage these type of discussions, because surely discussions about diversity and inclusion and how it's making people feel are really important to progress.
But we really want to discourage this kind of provocative, useless statement, because it's just driving people into opposing corners. There's nothing in this that will help us work something out, is it? It'll just cause a fight.
Well, OK, so Manny, I'll put to you then. So let's say that he genuinely turns up to work every single day at the BBC and he looks around and it's a sea of white people and that makes him feel uncomfortable. Should the BBC do anything about that?
God, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the BBC ought to do about this. I do think that if you live, as Sean said, in a country with 82% white people, statistically, there will be occasions when there are only white people around you, and that's not necessarily a sign of racism or some kind of malicious... It's simply people existing in a country that remains predominantly white. Mm. I just think, though, that saying these sorts of things in a broadcast like the BBC, I mean, I can remember growing up with the BBC, and I genuinely felt like the programming that was coming out of it was there to be not browbeating you. You know, you would just have a good history documentary, for example, that was not trying to, you know, make a political point. It was just a history documentary. And I do think that this is perhaps an indication of if people in the BBC working within it have come to imbibe these sorts of values, it kind of explains the pretty shoddy programming that has been coming out of the BBC recently.
But if you go on iPlayer, I would argue there is an over-representation of things that are quite virtue signalling. Whether it is, and it's all absolutely fine, of course, but whether it is things to do with, you know, I think quite a large number of stuff about the LGBTQ plus community, quite a large number of things in relation to race. I also think that there's usually some kind of angle put on something that doesn't necessarily need to be in there. That will be my view. No doubt they will dispute it. But we look at things like Newsround as well, really getting involved, based for kids, by the way, on things like critical race theory. We've got a load of it. You know, we've also just had...
Oh, and don't forget the BBC website as well.
Yes.
They're always running these ridiculous stories.
OK, yeah, I mean...
But I guess it just remains and it reflects that there are structural inequalities.
But is the inequality there not that they're actually too diverse in that sense?
No.
I think until we're in a post-racial society, this type of programming...
The problem with this...
Are we in a post-racial society?
A
society free from racism?
No,
because to suggest...
The point is this. The point is
we're not there yet.
We never will.
The point is this. We're not having a nuanced conversation, and actually, statements like this set us back. We need to have a nuanced conversation about what racism does, how it affects people. You know, where's the intersectionality between my race and my class? Just saying everybody's racist is just all that does is draw battle lines.
I don't think he was trying to say that. Yeah, but I'm trying to look on the bright side.
But that's a natural conclusion. That's a natural conclusion of being around white people and saying it gives you mental health. These white people, if he had said
he's talking about journalism specifically.
But he didn't say that.
He did. He was speaking out.
Right. So can I just say? So I actually used to listen to his show quite a lot because of the time of day that I happened to be driving around, etc., etc., etc. And you could almost set your watch or set your clock by the kind of topics he would discover. There would be one issue there about race. There would definitely be something really quite left-wing on it. There would usually be some kind of woman's issue. And I often found that even the good news story was, like, not a particularly good news story. It usually has some kind of sinister intent behind it. This would be my view about, you know, someone who's not really a rags to riches story. It's more pointing out the fact that they had to overcome some kind of serious racial hardship or something like that. Maybe I've only seen a selective amount of it or heard a selective amount of it, but that is my view. He's not held back, is he?
His experience
he's not held back, though, in his career by what he perceives to be an overly white environment. He's done very well.
But would you say the playing field was fair from the beginning? I think he probably had to try a little bit harder to get to where he is because of his race.
But look, that is almost definitely true. But I know people tell you they'd have to try harder because of their accent, you know, or because of the colour of their skin, or because they don't. The point I'm trying to say is, his comments lead the debate down.
This interpretation of his comments. His comments could spark a discussion about.
We have, by the way, again, I'll emphasise, we have asked him to come on. I can understand why he didn't, and we've asked for him to qualify various things, and he's not. Mandy, you know, if I or you took a job in, like, Nigeria, say, and we went in there, and one of us said the exact thing that he said, but we reversed that, right?
Yeah.
I don't think we'd... you to stroll on.
I don't know if we'd have a job to go to the next day, will be. Is there a double standard here?
Well, there is some irony to the fact that the countries that are the ones that have to kind of atone and hand-wring and do soul-searching and actually tolerate very divisive language that, you know, many people would consider racist in itself are the countries that tend to take the greatest steps towards promoting diversity, trying to combat racism, the places where people would, from around the world, most want to come and live. These are the countries, the nice countries, that kind of atone the most.
It's interesting stuff. Right, we're off to an absolute flyer this hour. Thank you very, very much. A spokesman for the BBC said, we want everyone who works at the Beeb, well, they said BBC, and those considering a career with us to know that we are focused on creating an inclusive culture where everyone feels they belong. Now, tomorrow, I'm going to bring you a big world exclusive. And, yeah, I think it's time to maybe just let the cat out of the bag, really. It is an exclusive interview with Nigel Farage's not-so-secret girlfriend, Laura Ferrari, as she opens up for the very first time ever on telly.
Been reading all sorts of, you know, nonsensical articles about me being a secret girlfriend. I'm not secret, I'm here, you know? I'm here. I work for Nigel Farage and he appointed me at these, you know, well-paid... never did that, never worked for him. But I'm not saying he is going to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
But he would be a good Prime Minister, I would say that. And I think he would do a good job at it.
Well, it was a really, really nice interview. I caught up with Laura earlier today, and there's a heck of a lot to go at. So tomorrow, on my show, 9 to 11 p.m, Nigel Farage's girlfriend, Laura Ferrari, reveals a side to Nigel that you've never seen before, and also just gives us a bit of an insight, really. And it was a pleasure to meet up with her, so thank you very much, Laura. But still to come tonight, the most entertaining pay-per-view you will get on the telly is my press pack, plus Fleet Street legend Kelvin MacKenzie gets stuck into tomorrow's news tonight as the world's leaders jet into oil-rich Dubai for COP28 climate conference. Are the elites in attendance the world's biggest eco and human rights hypocrites? Human rights lawyer David Haig hits out at the pampered politicians at the UAE, and that's next.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, the great and the not-so-good of world politics and royalty are jetting into Dubai today as the COP28 climate conference kicks off, with the Prime Minister, Lord Cameron and the King all in attendance. But the conference looks set to be overshadowed by the United Arab Emirates' appalling record on human rights and reports that the oil-rich state plan to use climate meetings, and I am not joking now, they plan to use climate meetings to strike deals for its national oil and gas companies. Right, well, to discuss this, I am now joined by human rights lawyer David Haig, who was jailed, and I will let him to go on to describe, if he feels comfortable, everything that happened to him there, in the United Arab Emirates jail. So, David, look, thank you very, very much. I mean, firstly, holding the conference in Dubai, is it an affront to all of those who have suffered at the hands of that regime? I mean, at face value, this is supposed to be about doing stuff that's, you know, for the good of humanity, isn't it? And, you know, I would argue that maybe they don't always do that themselves.
I mean, I think, good evening, Patrick. I think, you know, when I first heard that it was being held there, I mean, the words Dracula and Blood Bank came into mind. And you know, obviously the experiences that I've had myself in terms of, you know, I was detained there for 22 months, 9 months of which was for expressing views on Twitter. And then because of, you know, I ran a football club and I was quite well known, when I came back, lots and lots and lots of people and their families that were suffering human rights abuses came to me and said, look, we need help. We're suffering these terrible, terrible things. As we speak now, there's Brits there detained unlawfully. People like Ryan Cornelius, a chap called Charles Ridley, the viewers and listeners can Google them. So there are egregious human rights abuses carried out there daily. And that's not just Brits there, it's Americans, and it's those leaders, the leaders of the UAE that do it in our country. Many people remember recently a case of Princess Haya, who was the ruler, the wife of the ruler, fled to England in fear of her life with her children, and was given one of the highest divorce settlements in history because of the danger she was suffering and the fact that her family had been kidnapped. And these are all things that were found by our British courts against the rulers of that country. And now we see the likes of King Charles, Lord Cameron, and the great and the good going there, effectively covering up those human rights abuses.
Is it greenwashing, do you think?
I think that's exactly what it is. I mean, we're all familiar with sports washing. We're all familiar with the Middle Eastern countries buying our football teams and buying our sports teams. And now, obviously, you've got greenwashing, which is fairly new, but it's effectively the same thing. I mean, the absurdity of COP28 or any type of climate change conference being held in the country, which is one of the worst polluters. Why he's there on the screen now, Sultan Al Jaber, who is the head of their oil company. Like I said, it's like putting Dracula in charge of a blood bank.
Do you not just think that there is an unbelievable amount of hypocrisy taking place here? So you've got, an oil state, right, with an abominable human rights record. You've got a conference that is supposed to be about tackling climate change, which we're all being led to believe is an emergency, where people from all over the world are taking private jets to. Oil and gas deals are allegedly being struck at it, and miraculously they've decided to do it in a country where you cannot protest about any of this, because if you do protest about it, goodness knows what will happen to you. I mean, this is, I think, one of the most hypocritical clown world things that I have actually ever seen, and that really is saying something.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you completely. I mean, I've been advising privately quite a few of these groups that thought about going there, climate groups, and I basically said to them, look, if you protest like you do over here, you will end up in jail. You can't even, the law in the UAE, basically anyone that criticises anyone in government, and that would include this conference, it's an imprisonable offence. They will lock you up. And the hypocrisy is huge. That, we're seeing the world leaders, and they're effectively willing pawns in the cover-up of all of this. But I think the problem is, Patrick, it's nothing new. At the moment, as we speak, there are about 30 British judges who've been sitting in UAE courts and our courts at the same time on the payroll of both states working. So it's nothing new. We saw when, a lot of people may remember that I worked on a campaign for a lady called Princess Latifa. While she was detained and effectively kidnapped and held hostage, as was being found by the British courts, Theresa May was going to the UAE to head up a women's rights conference at the same time. So the hypocrisy is nothing new. It's just, we're just now seeing even more of people doing it.
Yeah, it's absolutely bonkers when you really think about it. I mean, giving Qatar the World Cup, and then all of a sudden, Hamas invades Israel, there's torture, there's rape, there's murder, there's a massive terrorist attack. And then you start to see people flying into Qatar and having negotiations. And it turns out that Qatar hosts all of the leaders of Hamas. And, we gave that lot a World Cup. We let them kind of just wash their nation there. Meanwhile, they've got the masterminds of, the biggest anti-Semitic genocide since the Holocaust taking place there. It's absolutely unbelievable. Look, David, thank you very, very much. It is always great to have your insight on that country and to know that maybe I've not entirely lost the plot and that it is a bit weird and a little bit insane that we're having a COP28 in Dubai. David Haid there, human rights expert and lawyer. Coming up, former editor of The Sun, Kelvin McKenzie, stops by to tackle tomorrow's headlines and deliver his verdict on, allegedly, work-shy GPs, as well as Elon Musk's latest outburst. But next, tomorrow's front pages have just been delivered, hot off the press. My press pack returns to get their teeth into a bombshell story. Is Labour and David Lammy taking us back into the EU? Plus, I will show you Sleepy Joe Biden's latest gaffe. He's gone nuclear. Back in a tick.
Earlier. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christys Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christys Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Now, tomorrow I'm going to bring you a world-exclusive interview with Nigel Farage's not-so-secret girlfriend, Laura Ferrari. She's never done a television interview before, and she's going to be doing it on our show tomorrow. Here's a little sneak peek.
Been reading all sorts of, you know, nonsensical articles about me being a secret girlfriend. I'm not secret, I'm here, you know? I'm here. I work for Nigel Farage and he appointed me at these, you know, well-paid. Never did that, never worked for him. But I'm not saying he is going to do it.
Yeah.
But he would be a good Prime Minister, I would say that. And I think he would do a good job at it.
There's a lot there. It goes on for a rather long time as well. You'll have about 25 minutes of that tomorrow. A very revealing interview. Laura Ferrari there, an absolutely wonderful lady, and I think you're all going to enjoy watching that. So between 9 and 11 p.m. tomorrow, Nigel Farage's girlfriend, Laura Ferrari, reveals a side of Nigel that you've never seen before. But let's bring you tomorrow's news tonight now in the most entertaining paper preview you will ever see on the telly. The very first front pages have just been delivered for my press pack. Right, OK, so going in with The Guardian, deal agreed at COP28 to help poor countries cope with climate crisis. Agreement on loss and damage fund reached on the first day of the summit. This will be interesting. How much are we all going to have to pay for other countries to deal with climate change and issues there? Hamas killed 3 at bus stop in Jerusalem, and, of course, they pay tribute in their picture story. Well, twice, actually. Firstly, Shay McGowan, remembering the trailblazing Pogue singer, and Alistair Darling as well, tributes paid for the former Chancellor. Now, we move on to the Eye. Labour. EU will be our #1 priority for UK foreign policy. A big picture of David Lammy on there as well. That will be interesting. Metro, keep calm and carry on. Royal race crisis. What royal race crisis, they say? The royals have shrugged off damaging new twists in the racism storm after, of course, the alleged royal racists were named. But then if we move over to the Express, why is it an injustice to name... Sorry, why it is an injustice to name royals in race route. Omid Scobie, the author of Endgame, seems determined to turn the title of his book into a reality for the royal family. And we'll just finish now with The Telegraph. Palace to look at legal action over, quotes, racist royals claim. We were absolutely hammering this 2 days ago on this show, saying, should they sue Scobie? Madeleine, I will start with you. This is, of course, your parish, The Telegraph. What do you make of this front page here? Big picture of Charles on tour. We, as a channel, of course, are not choosing not to name them. What do you make of the idea that maybe they should sue?
Well, it's actually pretty extraordinary and surprising that the royal family would consider taking this kind of action, because traditionally their approach to these sorts of things has been never complain, never explain. That wonderfully cryptic statement that was issued by the Queen following the initial Oprah interview where it said, you know, recollections may vary. Usually the way they try to deal with these sorts of things is to wait for them to go away and trust in the public to kind of, you know, come round to their way of thinking eventually. So for them to actually go full lawyering up, I'm very surprised by this, actually.
Yeah, indeed. Sean, what do you think about this? Do you think the palace should go on the front foot here and start lawyering up?
I think they might have to, because what you've seen here is someone who's organised, who's deliberate, who's written a book, who will gain a lot whatever happens, and the palace has probably thought, listen, there's a point where we have to defend ourselves, because if we don't, that void will be filled with all kinds of false information as far as we see it, so they're going to go out to bat for themselves. And I think actually in this context they should. What everybody's forgetting, when Meghan first met Harry, particularly in the black community, people were ecstatic about it. And King Charles in particular has not really ever had a race issue. You could love or hate the man, but people have never really said he was a racist or that he ran a family that was racist. So the royal family are probably thinking, right here, right now, we're going to take you on because this is the reputation.
Well, it'll be really interesting to see whether or not, as it's emerged tonight, so the person who was publishing and translated the Dutch version of Endgame, which of course has caused all of this controversy, has said that those names were in there. So it wasn't a translation error, as it was claimed. It wasn't a publishing error. It was, here's the copy, here's the manuscript, I've translated it for you. So it was in there.
It was a fix.
Do you think he should be made to prove it now in court?
Well, I don't know. I just find the whole thing really, really quite sad because, as we know, Omar Scobie is basically the Sussexes by proxy. And I've been watching The Crown, and it highlights the closeness between the brothers when they were little. And I think the fact that it's come to this now, it just makes you feel sad with the whole thing.
Well, it's interesting to see the differences, by the way, on the front page. The Telegraph obviously talking about legal action.
You don't want a family matter to end up in court.
Well, we've got the Metro as well saying keep being calm and carrying on. For what it's worth, I'd be very surprised if the Royals did anything. I'm not saying that they shouldn't. It's not their style, is it?
Not their style.
But they might be forced.
It shows that, sorry, Sean.
There might be forced, that's the issue. We live in a slightly different world. We live in a world of social media. We live in a world of reputation being maybe even more important than it used to be. And the Royals may decide to die.
But why don't they just go forward and progress and put more effort into race relations and learning about racism in
might
society?
have to do both.
And do lots of things. And I think King Charles is really up for that type of thing. He's shown himself to be...
Well, I think the King has been, pushing organisations like the Prince's Trust, working with people from poor socioeconomic backgrounds and ethnic minorities, been going on for decades, long before it was a mainstream
there would be a strong
for
argument.
most politicians.
He's very fond of the Commonwealth as well, always has been.
All right, look, I've just about got time for another one that's inside the book as well. In fact, it's on the front of the eye, actually. EU will be Labour's #1 priority for British foreign policy, says Lammy. EU ambassadors describe dealing with Starmer as like honey on toast.
Is that good?
In comparison to Tory ministers, says Foreign Secretary. David Lammy obviously coming out and saying ever closer ties with Europe. Maddie?
Well, this doesn't surprise me. They've been saying things like this for quite some time, and they've also been suggesting that just by kind of speaking to the EU in a more pleasant way, that they expect to get some kind of greater concessions. I think that is a nonsense. Whenever EU officials are asked about this, they say, we've actually smoothed over some of the tensions that were there. We now have the Windsor Framework. It's easier to deal with Rishi Sunak than it was with his predecessors, etc., etc. I think there's this element of wishful thinking, or perhaps they're not being entirely honest about the extent to which they would change the relationship. I mean, the question of a security pact, that I just think this is quite ridiculous. Like, we don't need to take our lead from the EU. The last few years of security, we have been leading the charge on Ukraine. Western Europe in particular was very sluggish. The EU leaders were very slow off the mark on that front. Meanwhile, negotiating things like the AUKUS Treaty. It's not as if Britain is an international pariah right now.
I mean, let me read out some of David Lammy's quotes. The European Union is our #1 priority. It's our #1 priority because it's our backyard. It's our #1 priority because there is war in Europe and because I believe our future prosperity and security is predicated on good relations with our European partners. They said that we do need to get back to a structured dialogue and that, he says, I did a meeting with Keir Starmer and European ambassadors and they described the tonal difference as being like honey on toast. Hold the sick bucket, Amy.
Yeah, but hooray! Because actually, this is what the public want. Over 60-odd% of people have buyer's regret over Brexit, unsurprisingly, looking at the outcome and the absolute economic mess that it's caused. So I think this is a great move, actually, and this is going to please a lot of people and reassure a lot of people, I think. I hope. I'm not sure about the honey on toast thing, though.
Honey on toast.
Like, without the butter, or just go straight in?
Eurozone economies are not fantastic at the moment.
Exactly. Let's be clear. Amy is correct.
It's been absolutely compacted by Brexit.
She's correct, but for the wrong reason. This is about winning an election.
All right, look, very quickly, all right, it's really no joke that gaff magnate Sleepy Joe Biden has access to the world's second biggest arsenal of nuclear weapons. But that didn't stop the President of the United States cracking a few light-hearted jokes about plunging the world into an apocalypse while talking to workers at a windmill factory in Colorado. Oh, and during the blunder-ridden visit, he also revealed that he thinks his political nemesis, former President Trump, is currently a congressman. Go on, Joe.
This is Nick. Hey, Nick. This is Nick with buddy. Now, look, my Marine carries that. It has a code to blow up the world. That doesn't... This is not nuclear weapons, is it? All right, okay. We just made these billionaires pay their taxes like everyone else. We could use it to strengthen the Social Security and Medicare system instead of cutting them, or like Congressman Trump and Bo want to do. We could use it to help millionaires and millions of families afford, instead of millionaires, millions of families afford a little help with senior care.
It's cruel. I honestly think it's cruel. This guy should... Anyway, whatever. Let's just hope that blithering Biden doesn't fumble the nuclear football. Oh, imagine just going to a wind farm in Colorado and just walking up to a completely random bloke in high-vis and going, I'm going to destroy the world. Now, coming up, though, is Brexit enemy Ursula von der Leyen right that the next generation will reverse our EU exit? Or is this more Project Fear? We debate it when I crown tonight's greatest Britain and Union jackass. But first, Fleet Street legend Kelvin MacKenzie gives his unfiltered verdict on tomorrow's headlines. Back soon.
We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, joining me now to give his irreverent take on tomorrow's newspapers is the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin MacKenzie. Kelvin, thank you very, very much to have you on. I've got The Independent, first and foremost, with what is a giant picture story. What on earth are they all waiting for? 2023 is now officially the hottest year on record. World leaders gathering in Dubai for the latest UN climate change conference already know what they must do to reverse catastrophic global warming. So today, The Independent demands act now before the sun sets on our planet. Before I go to Kelvin on this, I'm going to just bring in, again, my panel here. Do you think this is climate alarmism in a nutshell? We've got The Independent here with a giant picture story saying, look, you know, what are they all waiting for? And it looks as though the world's on fire.
Well, I think that it's very easy to have these kinds of headlines and to say in hand-wringing tones, something must be done, without setting out exactly what that something is, what it will cost, does the technology exist? There are practical considerations here, and it seems like all we hear is the kind of Greta Thunberg line on this.
Buddy Grant, you have successfully filled the 30 seconds we needed to get Kelvin MacKenzie locked and loaded, which means it's time. Kelvin, thank you very much. Same question to you. Is The Independent out of order for saying, what on earth are they all waiting for? I mean, what do they actually want, seriously?
Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter what The Independent says, does it? Let's be honest about it. It's got no influence, got no circulation, and basically it's got no real financial future. So I have no idea. I don't spend my time worrying about what The Independent thinks, nor what Greta Thunberg thinks. I would like to see things change. but I'd like somebody to tell me how much it's going to cost me and whether actually we can deliver any of this stuff. And, you know, at one stage we thought splitting the atom was the answer. Now we think fusion is the answer. Actually, the truth about the matter is nobody knows what the answer is, but I could bet you $1 million that the answer will be that your taxes will have to pay for a load of people who are freezing to death. That will be the next argument. Do you want your neighbour to freeze to death? And the answer to that is yes.
There we go. A sad day for everyone living next door to Kelvin Mackenzie. I'm going to go to your old parish now, Kelvin, The Sun. Yeah. They lead with Wild Man Dies at 65 and the bells are ringing out for Shane. His Christmas classic Fairy Tale of New York is set for #1. So fans raised a glass to Shane McGowan. I mean, with respect to the guy, he raised a few himself, didn't he? Royals brush off book row is another one. Senior Royals yesterday brushed off the race row that was triggered by Omar Scobie's discredited. But we are not naming the people who are in that book, Kelvin.
Good. I mean,
do you think Piers maybe fell into Omar Scobie's trap there?
I don't know whether look, there's always an outlier in journalism. And today it turns out to be Piers, and on another day it'll either be you, me, or somebody like us, right? But the truth about the matter is, what I object to is that this was carefully crafted. The idea that suddenly in Holland, unusually, these names happened to appear, whereas the rest of the world they didn't. But that way they got the names out, and that way they got the publicity. The whole thing's a massive scam. And congratulations to this bloke, Omid, who's prepared to use the royal family to sell that to make its fortune. It's a scam, and what we should do, and I agree with GB News, they shouldn't name it, but it's too late. The hair's running, and he will sell a lot of books on the back of it, and he'll make himself a lot of money. And that's what book publishing is about. It's about making money.
Yeah, he's about to be successful at that, I suppose, at least. Now, look, Kelvin, it's nigh on impossible to get a GP appointment. OK, but it turns out at a conference of leaders last week they voted in favour of limiting doctors to just 25 patients a day. Currently, some GPs are reportedly having to cram in 50 patients a day. They want to enforce a, quote, safe limit to reduce the risk of missing serious illness. What's your verdict here, Kelvin? Are GPs being lazy or is it the safe option?
Well, the reality, of course, is they're prepared to take you on the telephone, in which case on the phone, which in fact is more risky, as has just been revealed in that report, which says that you can have sepsis or a cancer or something, which they will never diagnose. However, if I was to take my local clinic, they're flogging themselves. A group of, I don't know, about 10 GPs are seeing people about every 5 or 6 minutes. And there are, you know, so I actually feel sorry for both sides of the equation here. And my other question is, we've had 13 years of conservatism and we've had thousands of years of politics. Why is it we don't have enough doctors in our country to deal with what we know the population is going to look like? We know that 60 million is going to become 70 million and the problems are likely to get worse. And the reality is that we are going to have to pay more taxes unless we start working harder and cleverer. You know, the reality for many sick people out there is that they are going to die because their doctors haven't got enough time to see them. You must see that yourself with the amount of time you spend at the doctor.
Yeah, you know, but I mean, I had an experience recently where I had to literally chase the doctors at every single turn. Thankfully, everything's fine. The nation will be pleased to know, of course. But the point is, if I hadn't been fine, I quite possibly would have been dead by now, and it's just ridiculous that you have to do that at every single opportunity, and it makes you think about the elderly or people who are in a vulnerable situation. I mean, you shouldn't have to, you know, do your own dirty work to demand to see what the results of a scan were or something like that. But Kelvin, go on, final word.
The question is, why has this happened now? Why, literally over the last, say, 3 or 4 years, including COVID, why have we suddenly come to this? And there won't be a clinic in the country nor a patient in the country who won't replicate your view.
Very quickly, Kelvin, obviously The Sun is also paying tribute, as quite a few papers are, to Shane McGowan of the Pogues, Fairy Tale of New York. Once you've dusted the ice off from around your own heart, Kelvin, what's your favourite Christmas song?
Well, I don't celebrate Christmas myself, but were I, I don't mind that line. But remember, in his fairy tale in New York, he refers to faggot, doesn't he?
Oh.
And that turned out. So would Stonewall celebrate him in that way? I don't know. Anyway, he's a great talent. And he's dead, but the truth about the matter is,
obviously, I will apologise now for if anyone was offended by that use of language. I know it's a very, very controversial lyric that always causes controversy every single year. Calvin Mackenzie there, ladies and gentlemen. Now, on to my Greatest Britain and Union Jackass. Maddie, here's your Greatest Britain.
I've gone for Alistair Darling because he was a very rare thing in politics. He was a politician who just kind of got on with things quietly, efficiently, wasn't massively ego-driven, which is quite rare given that he was part of the Blair government.
Yes.
However, he was a good, humble, honest, decent man who made some very sensible decisions while in Chancellor. And another reason that I'm a big fan of his was that he was the chair of the Better Off In campaign for the Scottish independence referendum, so a big champion of the union.
Good stuff. Strong start. Sean?
Mine's just Shane McGowan, notwithstanding what Kelvin has just said.
Yes.
Because when I was a security guard, I worked at one of his concerts, and I've very rarely seen a crowd love their performer so much.
Really?
Yeah, and he was a funny guy, and obviously he's got that really famous song, A Fairy Tale in New York.
Tip for Christmas #1, of course. Amy, go on.
I've gone for Rishi Sunak.
Hang on a minute. What? This is Greatest Britain, not Union Jackass, yeah?
Because I think he needs cheering up this week after the absolute pasting he received at PMQs. He looked so sad and demoralised.
All right.
So I just want to give him a little pep, little morale boost.
Today's Greatest Britain is Shane McGowan. There we go. So well done, Shane. Right, now we're going to have to rattle through these, all right? Your Union Jackass, Maddie.
Can I have a pair of them at once?
Go on, if you're quick.
OK, Rycroft and Ridley, the two
good.
Home Office mandarins that we saw earlier, unable to offer the most basic details about their department.
Top start again. Sean?
Ursula von der Leyen for telling the young of this country that they should reverse Brexit. We should reverse her. Brexit was a decision made by us all.
OK, Amy.
We don't want it anymore. Elon Musk for saying advertisers need to F off.
Yeah.
And he doesn't need them. I think he
Definitely
needs
not the worst thing
them.
to say tonight,
I think
so
he might
that's all
need
right.
them for X.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Tell you what.
Maybe I'm
Here we
naive.
go.
If somebody's going to try to blackmail me with advertising, blackmail me with money, go yourself.
Yeah, there we go. I actually quite enjoyed that.
It's
I'll be honest
quite
with you.
weird, wasn't it?
OK, the winners of Union Jackass tonight are those Home Office officials. Yes, of course they are. So, look, thank you very, very much to everybody who's been tuning in, who's been listening. Thank you to my wonderful panel. Thank you to all my guests. Just a little reminder, set your alarm clocks, because tomorrow's show, very special edition, we do have a world exclusive, a first ever television interview with Nigel Farage's not-so-secret girlfriend, Laurel Ferrari, who actually sets the world to rights and comes out and reveals the truth, contradicting quite a lot of things that have been written about her recently. It's a wide-ranging interview. Possibly we'll see Nigel Farage in a slightly different light as well and get to know them all a little bit better. Make sure you tune in for that. It'll be big.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Friday is going to be another dry day for many of us, but it will be feeling very cold once again, with potentially some freezing fog to start and some snow showers. We've seen snow as a result of this frontal system bumping into the cold air across parts of the southwest. That will clear away throughout the course of the night, but it will leave with it a risk of ice on the roads across parts of Devon and Cornwall. There's also a risk of some ice across the northeast of England, as well as many eastern areas of Scotland as a result of the snow showers. You could also see some icy stretches across parts of Northern Ireland. So it'll be another very cold start tomorrow morning. It could be as low as -7, -8 once again. There'll also be some freezing fog patches across many central and eastern areas. These could be quite slow to clear. There'll also be some showers starting to come in across parts of Suffolk. We could see some sleetiness within this as well. But for many of us, it will be a dry day with some winter sunshine, but temperatures still really struggling, 2 or 3 degrees at best in many places. And then Saturday is going to start on a very cold note. We could be down as low as minus double digits. Some crisp sunshine to be had, mostly across northeastern areas this time, with showers moving in from the west. These showers could fall as snow over the high ground of Wales and potentially across central areas as well. But things turn somewhat less cold early next week.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News. Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.